Hey everyone, tonight we start with the lovely, cozy, and heartwarming world of life in a Victorian factory. You know, that time when kids worked 12-hour shifts and the air quality was so bad it could be called a weapon. So, before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Please leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who is coming from all over the world. Let's start our journey tonight by turning down the lights and maybe turning on a fan to make a soft background noise. A bell rings to start your first day as a Victorian factory worker, just like it does in all Victorian tragedies. Not a soft good morning chime. No, this bell sounds like it's angry that you're still alive. Outside, it's pitch black. The sun has not agreed to take part. The rats are still asleep, and they work at night. But you have to get up. You take off your skin, off a straw mattress that feels like someone angrily filled a potato sack with sharp things and regrets. Your back cracks like a door that has been around for a long time. Your joints tell you something like, "Why are we doing this?" And your breath makes a white cloud in the cold air. That's right. You're so cold that you're making your own special effects. Your breakfast is yesterday's bread, which has become as hard as a weapon from the Middle Ages. You try to bite it, but your teeth file a complaint. Protest. No butter, no jam, no coffee. Only rich people and French people can afford caffeine. Victorian workers got up in the morning with only their survival instinct and a lot of negativity. You put on clothes that can only be described as itchy from the past. It feels like someone who hated skin made every fiber. They are stiff, heavy, and smell like the sins of everyone who wore them before you. You step outside, ready to face the day, but you quickly rethink every decision you've made. Brought you here, the air smells like soot, coal, smoke, damp fog, and something that can only be called urban sadness. Someone coughs close by, and the sound echoes like a haunted accordion. A child runs by you, already late for their 12-hour shift. In Victorian England, childhood was more of a rumor than a real thing. You don't want to know what the slime on the street is. Your shoes, which are basically cardboard lined with hope, get wet right away. Well done. Your day starts with light trench foot. Then the factory bell rings again, this time louder, as if it took your refusal personally. You walk faster, not because you want to, but because Victorian foremen can legally yell at you until you die. And the worst part is that you haven't even gotten to the factory yet. You haven't looked at the machines. You haven't breathed in the dust. You haven't met the foreman yet, whose personality is like a boiled potato that hasn't been seasoned. You're already thinking about it this morning. No, I won't make it through this. I'm going back to bed. Your trip to the factory is not a nice morning walk. There is no sunrise, no birds singing, and no happy neighbor wishing you a good day. Instead, you go out into a Victorian street that looks like it was cut from a horror novel. The fog is so thick that it feels like it has weight, like wet cement, and it smells like the Industrial Revolution and people who are still coughing. The ground under you isn't a road, so like a smoothie made of mud and soot. Every step you take could make your shoe come off completely, which would be bad because Victorian shoes cost about 2 years' worth of wages and don't keep you warm at all. As you walk, you see the local wildlife, which includes rats that are as big as emotional support dogs. They aren't afraid of you. They don't go. They just look at you and say, "Oh, you're going to the factory. That's rough." Even the rats feel sorry for you. That should tell you everything you need to know. You pass rows of small homes where families of 8 share a room. They all breathe the same air, get sick from the same things, and make bad choices in life. Because the sun hasn't shone on this neighborhood since George was king, the laundry hangs limply in the damp air and drips onto the street. Kids who should be sleeping, going to school, or doing anything else but this run past you with tools in their hands. Some are only 5 years old. 5. Kids that age now are learning about colors. In Victorian England, they are learning how to avoid getting sucked into machines. In a sad way, cute. As you get closer to the factory, the sky gets darker. This isn't because of clouds, it's because of smoke. A real man-made fake night. Chimneys spew black smoke like dragons with a cold. And after just 2 minutes in this place, your lungs feel like they're getting older by the day. You look down as you cross a narrow bridge and see the river, which used to be water but is now a soup of chemicals, dead fish, and regret. It makes bubbles. Water shouldn't bubble unless it is heated. You tell yourself that you should never fall into it unless you want superpowers or to die right away. And just when you think things can't get any worse, the factory bell rings again. Loud, metal, and full of disappointment. You speed up. Not because you want to, but because you're afraid the foreman will find out you're late. The foreman is a man who is 90% angry and 10% happy. Your shoes are wet, your lungs are weak, and your mood is low by the time you get to the factory gates. Low, and your spirit is slowly leaking out of your ears. And this was just the trip to work. You haven't even begun your shift yet. You made it through the Victorian commute, which should get you a national medal. Now you are finally at the factory, where your dreams and spine will die. It rises out of the smog like a brick mountain built by someone who hated windows, air, and happiness. The building is huge and scary, and it looks both empty and full at the same time. At the same time. The noise is the first thing you notice. You can't see the machines yet, but you can hear them. A far-off metallic roar that sounds like angry kitchen tools attacking a thunderstorm. There are a lot of clanks, bangs, whirs, and the sound of a steam pipe letting off pressure, which sounds like it's also stressed out. Your ears try to leave your body right away. The doors to the factory are heavy iron slabs, like the doors you would expect to see on a medieval, a dungeon, or a prison with a lot of security. You don't want to touch them because they give off an unsettling energy that makes you think of terrible things that happened to fingers. Once you step inside, a wall of heat, noise, and grime hits you. It's so thick that it almost has its own personality. The inside is dark, with only small windows that are both dirty and broken beyond recognition. Dust is in the air, like it's paying rent. People walk through the haze like ghosts with union problems. The floor is not level and covered in oil, dirt, metal shavings, and things you don't want to name for your own mental health. Every step feels like a risk, and every risk feels like a lawsuit that hasn't happened yet. Your first thought is to turn around and leave, maybe even run or move to a different century. But no, the boss has seen you. He is a man made up of nothing but frowns, stress, and Victorian sadness. His job is to stare at workers until they work faster, and he is. Very good at it. He gives you a look that says, if you even think about going home, I will invent new forms of disappointment. You look at the machines and wish you hadn't made any of the choices that brought you here. The looms, gears, belts, and presses are all huge, loud, and powered by steam and spite. Every machine looks like it's one poorly timed blink away from taking away an important part of your body. And the shift hasn't even started yet. You hear a metallic orchestra of doom and realize something deep. You don't belong here. Your modern brain says, nope. Your lungs say, goodbye. And your heart says, is it too late to become a baker instead? Welcome to the factory. You might expect some kind of structured orientation, a friendly supervisor, a pamphlet, or a demonstration video with a happy man explaining things on your first day in a Victorian factory. No, absolutely not. This is the Victorian era. The only safety training you get is don't stand too close to things that spin fast. Your training starts when a foreman points to a huge machine the size of a carriage and says, right, you operate that. That's it. Those 4 words are your syllabus, your handbook, and your entire educational framework. You stare at the machine and it stares back at you menacingly. And somewhere deep inside, a little voice whispers, it's been a good life. Victorian machinery is not friendly. It is not labeled. It is not color-coded. It does not have a helpful emergency stop button. It's a tangled mess of gears, belts, pistons, and steam pipes, all screaming for attention, and occasionally spitting hot droplets at you like angry mechanical llamas. Your job is to keep everything running smoothly, which is optimistic, considering you don't even know what half the parts do. Perhaps no one does. A coworker approaches you, an older man, missing 3 fingers and most of his enthusiasm for life. This is your mentor. He shouts over the noise, don't let your sleeve get caught, then immediately turns away because, frankly, that covers most of the curriculum. You nod politely, as if this single warning will protect you from the 18 other ways the machine plans to injure you. You try to pay attention to the motions of the workers around you, but they move with the speed and precision of people who have long since accepted their fate. They grab, pull, crank, feed, push, twist, all in a sequence so complicated it might as well be a dance performed as a warning to future generations. The foreman walks by again, glaring at you with the intensity of a man who believes that inefficiency is a personal insult. He yells, faster! Even though you haven't yet identified which part of the machine is the work part, you'd love to ask questions, But questions imply curiosity, and curiosity implies you're new. And if they know you're new, they might put you at a more dangerous station, like feeding raw materials into the machine, affectionately known as the hand collector. Every second you spend in orientation lowers your life expectancy. Your pulse rises, your palms sweat, your clothes become a liability, and your eyes dart around like you're waiting for a trap door to open. At this point, standing in front of a huge Victorian machine, with nothing but anxiety and finger counting as your guide, you realize your real orientation. Don't try to die. Try not to die yet. Now that you've made it through orientation, which was basically someone yelling, "Don't lose a limb," over industrial screaming, it's time to meet your new coworkers, the Victorian machines. These huge, steam-powered machines have all the empathy of a tax auditor during a famine. Modern machines beep politely, offer help, and stop automatically if you sneeze near them. Victorian machines, they work in a very different way. One philosophy that can be summed up as, if it moves, crush it. If it doesn't move, crush it anyway. The first time you reach for the machine with shaky hands, you see all the warning signs around you, not painted signs. Those didn't exist yet. No, the warnings come from your coworkers' missing fingers. One man is missing a thumb, another is missing two fingertips, and the veteran next to you looks like he lost something so long ago he can't even remember what it was. Remember which part. Machines in this era were driven by leather belts spinning so fast they practically became philosophical concepts. One moment there is a visible belt. The next moment it's a blur capable of removing your sleeve, dignity, and arm in a single swoop. You try to keep your clothing tucked in, but Victorian fabric has no stretch, no flexibility, and no interest in teamwork. If your shirt catches on something, it's taking you with it. You attempt to focus, feeding raw material into the machine as the gears grind, the pistons pump, and every clank feels like a personal threat. The whole thing shakes the floor in a way that makes it seem like it is held together only by rust, hope, and passive aggression. Sometimes someone will shout a warning, like, "Watch your hands," or "Mind the gears," which would be helpful if you weren't already fully committed to keeping every part of yourself intact. The problem is that Victorian machines don't care about they can smell weakness and fear. And you're making fear at a factory scale. At one point, your sleeve brushes just a little too close to a spinning cog. Time slows down. You see your past life flash before your eyes, including memories you didn't even know you had, like that time you cried over dropping a sandwich. You jerk your arm away just in time, and a coworker nods in approval, as if you've passed a very dark rite of passage. You hear that one machine in the corner is nicknamed the Nibbler. You do not ask why. By midday, you understand why Victorian workers never became attached to their fingers. The machines wanted them more. Take a deep breath. Actually, no, don't. Not in a Victorian factory. The air inside this place is not air. It is a hostile substance, a mixture, a cocktail, a Victorian smoothie of dust, soot, steam, oil vapor, and the faint aroma of everyone else's suffering. From the moment you walk in, your lungs file a complaint. Each inhale feels like you've eaten a handful of gravel by mistake. Every breath feels like a battle between life and bad choices. Breathing becomes a strategic choice instead of an automatic one. You look around and see that the air has texture. You can see particles floating around. If you work in a textile mill, you see cotton lint. If you work with machinery, you see metal dust. And if the factory is powered by a steam engine that looks like it could spark a national disaster, you see coal soot. These particles swirl through the air like they're enjoying their freedom at your expense. Within minutes, your throat is dry, your eyes are watering, and your lungs feel like a poorly maintained accordion. Victorian workers called this sensation normal. Modern doctors would call it, you need to get out of there immediately. But no, your shift is just beginning. Workers around you cough constantly, not small coughs, the kind of coughs that echo across the factory floor like dying bears. You hear deep rattling wheezes that sound like someone trying to start an old lawnmower. No one covers their mouth because that everyone is too busy clinging to consciousness. And if someone coughs something solid, well, that's between them and the nearest priest. The factory floor is hot too. Steam powers everything, so the temperature hovers somewhere between uncomfortable sauna and slow boiling beef stew. You sweat instantly, which would be fine if the sweat didn't immediately combine with soot to create a new element. Victorian paste, a sticky black coating on your skin that never fully washes off. Your lungs get heavier. The deeper into the factory you walk, the worse it gets. By mid-morning, you're trying to conserve oxygen like a Victorian monk practicing industrial meditation. You've invented 3 new coughing patterns, and you're starting to see shapes in the haze. The machines, the foreman, or perhaps just your will to live, leaving your body in visible form. And there's no escape. The windows are sealed shut because opening them would let the outside air in. And people who aren't working in factories right now don't get to enjoy fresh air. By noon, you don't need a doctor to tell you what's wrong. You need a time machine. This isn't air, it's the Industrial Revolution's way of telling you to go home. If you thought the air was trying to kill you, just wait until you hear the soundtrack of Victorian industrialism. The factory noise isn't just background noise, it's a constant, unrelenting, psychological assault. Echo. It takes up space in your head like it's paying rent. The moment you step onto the factory floor, the sound hits you like a brick to the face. The machines roar, clank, grind, whir, hiss, and bang in a chaotic symphony that would make even heavy metal bands say, okay, that's a bit much. It's not just loud, it's aggressive, violent, the kind of noise that doesn't fade into the background, but becomes the background of your nightmares. Your ears immediately begin to protest. They try to fold themselves shut. They try to quit. They think about moving to a quieter part of your head. But Victorian factories don't have any quiet parts. They only have louder parts and even louder parts. Communication is impossible. If you want to talk to the person next to you, you have to scream like you're confessing a lifelong secret. Most of the time, they still don't hear you. The machines drown out every sound. even your internal monologue, which is actually a good thing because your internal monologue is. Right now, the noise is so loud that you'll try to protect your hearing by covering your ears, tilting your head, and praying. None of it works. The noise goes through you like the factory is trying to talk directly to your bones. Victorian workers didn't have earplugs. The closest thing to ear protection was stuffing cotton into your ears, which is also what caused half the hearing problems in the first place. As the hours go by, your brain starts to adapt badly. You start to imagine patterns in the clanging, like the machines are sending you threatening Morse code messages. One piston makes a noise that, if you listen long enough, resembles laughter. And that's when you realize the machines aren't just loud, they're mocking you. Your nerves fray, your shoulders tense, your sanity loosens. Time becomes irrelevant. Your thoughts blur into one continuous plea for silence. But the machines do not care about your suffering. They are fueled by steam, coal, and spite. And they will keep screaming until the end of your shift or the end of civilization. Victorian workers often went deaf slowly. You're going deaf immediately, and possibly emotionally too. By the end of hour one, you don't just want silence, you want revenge. Just when you think the machinery is the worst thing in the factory, something far more demoralizing enters your field of vision: the supervisor. Victorian supervisors were not hired for their communication skills or emotional warmth. No, they were selected for chronic unhappiness, the ability to glare through walls, and a voice that could cut through industrial noise and hope at the same time. Your boss appears out of the steam like a Victorian ghost who hasn't been paid enough. He stands straight, looks grim, and has eyebrows that seem to be stuck in the "I'm disappointed in you" position. You don't even know him yet, but you already feel like you owe him money. His clothes are simple: dusty pants, a waistcoat, and boots that have crushed a lot of hopes. But what really makes him who he is his aura of authority. This aura gives off stress. When he walks by, workers stand up straight and move with the speed and panic that people usually have during natural disasters. The boss doesn't smile. He doesn't even blink. He just makes judgments. His way of encouraging is faster. His way of giving constructive criticism: "You're not doing it right. We don't pay you to think," which is his idea of empathy. He comes up to you slowly, like a predator who is not happy that he has to chase after his food. You try to act normal, but it's hard because you don't know what normal looks like when there are death machines all around you. Your back is covered in sweat. Your hands are shaking. You think about making eye contact, but then you quickly change your mind. He can tell when someone is scared by looking them in the eye. When he finally talks to you, he doesn't say hello. It's a question that is really a warning. Is that all you can do? Your soul leaves your body for a short time. He points at your machine and yells out tips that aren't. Advice: don't stop it. Just keep it moving. You nod your head in agreement, even though you have no idea whose fault it is when the machine suddenly stops working for fun. Around you, experienced workers move with robotic precision, acting like they're not scared. They've been here long enough to know that the boss can smell weakness, like sharks can smell blood, and if someone does slow down, it's possible that they're hurt. Maybe their spirit just left for a while. The bosses, the voice cuts through the factory. Do you want to be replaced? The answer is always yes, but the money says no. At this point, you know you can handle the noise, the dust, and even the machines, but the boss is the real bad guy of the Industrial Revolution. You might think that a lunch break is a time to rest, get your act together, and maybe even get your will to live back. But in the Victorian factory, a lunch break is just the time when you keep working, while chewing on something that might be good for you. The bell rings, letting everyone know that this is a holy time to eat. And by sacred, I mean about 8 minutes, give or take how nice the boss is that day. He never feels like giving. The machines keep going. You never stop. Your fear of death doesn't go away. The only thing that stops is your hope. Whatever you could fit in your pocket without it melting is your lunch. A cold, wrinkled potato, bread from yesterday that has now become a bit fossilized, or, if you're lucky, a piece of cheese that costs half a week's pay and smells like it is legally a weapon. You pull it out with shaky hands, blow off a fine layer of factory dust, and then you eat it. Yummy. No, but it has calories, which is enough. People who worked in the Victorian era didn't sit down to eat. Sitting down would mean resting, and resting would mean being human. Instead, everyone stands at their machines, hunched over like goblins, eating their sad lunches and avoiding moving parts that could quickly turn a meal break into a medical emergency. You have a moral crisis if your bread falls on the floor. Do you pick it up? Do you leave it? Do you cry? Do you see this as a sign that lunch is over? Most people pick it up. Rule of 5 seconds. In the Victorian factory, it's more of a rule to give it a quick look every 5 seconds to make sure no rats get there first. The noise is so loud that you can't even hear yourself chewing, which is a good thing because Victorian food doesn't taste good. Nice sounds. Your jaw works hard to break through bread that could also be used to build things. At the same time, bits of dust get into your food, making it crunchy in a way that no cookbook could ever explain. Sometimes, during lunch, someone tries to make a small joke or tired smile with a coworker, but the noise drowns everything out. Not by rules, but by the environment. Laughter is not allowed. Your brain is probably losing oxygen if you can smile. Then, just as your stomach starts to, the supervisor stomps by and yells, "Food has arrived!" The break is over. Your soul falls apart. It has been 8 minutes. Your potato is not done yet. Your jaw hurts. Your spirit is worn out. And now you have to work for another 10 hours. Hello and welcome to Victorian lunch. Your energy is gone by the time the afternoon comes around. Not low, not tired, but completely gone, as if it had packed a small bag, slipped out the back door, and moved to another country. Your body is now only working on your gut feeling, fear, and the tiny nutrients that were in the cold potato you ate for lunch. The machines don't care. The boss doesn't care. Even time seems to be moving slowly, as if it doesn't want to speed up because it likes seeing you suffer. Your arms hurt because you've been doing the same things over and over, since sunrise. Your back feels like it's in a sad play. Your legs are shaking. Your fingers are numb, and numbness can be both scary and comforting in a workplace where losing a finger is seen as a small problem. This is the time of day when Victorian workers entered what historians call the afternoon slump and what you might call the final collapse. Your eyelids get heavy. You start to sway a little, not because you're dancing, but because gravity is trying to get you to give up. Every minute seems like an hour. Every hour feels like someone is attacking me. Your brain is starving for more than just the sound of clanking metal and the foreman's voice. Disapproval starts to drift away. You picture yourself in a peaceful place, like lying in a grassy meadow, sitting by a quiet river, or just being asleep in any decade other than this one. Then your hand slips. You wake up with a start and remember that the machine you're using can cut off big parts of your body if you daydream too much. Around you, the same thing is happening to everyone else. Some workers move on autopilot, with their eyes glazed over like owls that have been working too hard. Others are pale from lack of food. Some of them look like they're talking to ghosts because they're so tired, but no one stops. They can't. The machine keeps moving, so you have to keep moving. If you stop, your arms and legs will get a taste of industrial era engineering. Your brain starts to ask strange questions. How long have I been here? What is time, anyway? Will this shift ever be over? You look at the time. You believe 3 hours have gone by. You're wrong. 7 minutes have passed. Your stomach is rumbling. Your back squeezes. Your soul goes away. But the afternoon still won't end. You can only keep working and breathing lightly. The air is bad for you, and hope that the bell will eventually be kind. It won't, though, not for a long time. At some point in the afternoon, when your soul has completely left your body and your muscles are working out of spite, you see something terrible. When someone gets hurt, no one does anything. No one, really. A man at a station a few stops away gets his hand caught in a spinning belt. He yells, moves quickly, and then he's missing a finger. Just one finger. Not enough for a break. Not enough to feel sorry for. Not even enough for paperwork. Because paperwork doesn't exist yet, unless it's a bill you can't pay. He wraps the rest of the finger in a cloth that he probably washed last during the Crimean War, says something rude, and then keeps working. You stand there in shock, holding your hand tightly and thinking, surely this deserves a break. It doesn't. When Victorian workers get seriously hurt, they have 3 different reactions. A grunt, an insult aimed at the machine, and the shift goes on. You stubbed your toe earlier and almost filed for early retirement, though. Another worker gets their hair stuck in a piece of machinery. The machine growls. She yells. The boss yells. Not because I'm worried, but because the real tragedy here is that people are losing productivity. They let her hair down, give her a cap, and she goes back to work like nothing happened. You look. It all happens as if you're watching an alternate universe where human pain is just an annoying scheduling conflict. Burns happen even more often. The sound of steam pipes is like angry geese, and when they let go of pressure without warning, they burn everything in their path. Arms, faces, and hope. When workers stop, they swear, shake their arms, and then go back to feeding the machine because it will definitely find a way to punish you for stopping. Someone sometimes gets pulled into a machine more. Really. The line stops for a few minutes, but not to help. No one here is trained to do that, but they are trained to do extraction. During this break, workers can stretch, wipe off sweat, or eat a piece of their lunch bread rock hybrid. It's the closest thing anyone can get to a peaceful moment. And what about your boss? He feels a range of emotions. From annoyed to bored, he doesn't care because he's seen too many injuries. He probably uses them as chances to teach people without being too formal. That's what happens when you don't pay attention. Back to work, you suddenly see the scary truth. Here, injuries aren't just accidents, they are parts of the job. Workers in the Victorian era built strength. You make panic, and the change goes on. It seems like you've been working for 14 lifetimes. The machines are still making noise. Sweat and delusion keep your body together, and your soul has long since loved to live a quieter life in the countryside of France. But then, out of nowhere, the bell rings. For a short, transcendent moment, you feel something like happiness. The sound is sharp and metallic, but your tired Victorian brain thinks it's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Your whole body feels better. Your fingers let go. Your spine starts to relax a little. You smile for the first time since you were a kid. The change is done. You did it. You made it. You're free now. Or so you think, foolishly, because you're already imagining how nice it will be to fall face down on your straw mattress as you walk away. Your boss shows up. His. The silhouette blocks the door like an eclipse in the Victorian era. He clears his throat like a guy does when he's about to ruin your year. He says over time, not as a suggestion or a point of negotiation, but as a decree. Your smile goes away right away, like loose plaster falling off the wall of a condemned building. You have to work overtime. You don't get paid more for working extra hours. Overtime is just the universe saying, congratulations, you thought you were done. How cute. In the Victorian factory system, if the you are running when the machines are running, you need fewer limits if the machines need more output. The bell that just rang like a party now sounds like a prank. You go back to your station with the posture of a peasant from the Middle Ages being led to the stocks. Your whole body is in pain. Your knees are weak. Your wrists feel like they're made of melted candle wax. Your shoulders are gone. They are now part of history. Workers in the Victorian era didn't complain very often. They didn't have the money to. But you start to bargain with the universe. You whisper, if I make it through this, I will never complain about Wi-Fi again. That's a brave promise, especially since your chances of survival are going down like the quality of air in Victorian times. The extra time goes on and on and on. The light outside gets dimmer. The windows get darker. Not that they were doing much, though. Your body's clock stops working. The only rhythm left in your life is the machine's dangerous heartbeat and the boss's occasional yelling. Finally, after working extra hours for hours, or definitely not in your made-up contract, the bell rings for real. This time, no one is happy. They just shuffle out, not feeling anything. You walk toward the door with one thought in mind. Lynette's and a Victorian factory worker really needed to talk if this is the best of all possible worlds. After a long enough shift, you leave the factory like a ghost who died from working too hard and is now unsure of how to haunt. It should feel good to breathe the air outside, but this is Victorian England, so it mostly feels like coal. Anything is better than the factory, though. Your legs are like jelly. Jelly that isn't smooth or pretty. No, it's more like the lumpy, scary jelly that Victorian kids hated at Christmas. Every step makes your spine tingle. Your shoes are so full of sewer water that they are now legally soup, and your feet hurt. It's dark outside. Not dark like at night, but dark like in a factory. A thick fog rolls in, bringing the smell of burning coal, trash that is rotting, and someone coughing loudly 3 streets away. You breathe in deeply without thinking, and then you regret it right away when your lungs threaten to unionize. The walk home should be easy, but nothing in the Victorian era is. The cobblestones are uneven, slippery, and seem to move around to trip you. You hold your coat around you, but it only keeps you warm in a mental way. Yes, kids walk next to you. They also just got off work. Their little bodies carry tools that are bigger than their dreams. A 6-year-old walks by you without a care in the world, looking better than you do. You feel ashamed. After working for 14 hours, he's going home to help his family with chores. You're barely able to stay upright. Rats run across your path, as brave as ever. When you look one in the eye, you get the feeling that it is judging you. It probably worked harder than you did. It does look cleaner, that's for sure. You go by rivers that are polluted, wooden fences that have fallen down, and too many people, tenements, and sometimes a man yelling at a chimney for no reason. Every part of your body hurts. Your arms feel like wet rope. Your throat hurts. Your elbows hurt, and you didn't even know that elbows could hurt on their own. You start to daydream halfway home, not about food or sleep. Those are dreams for the long term. You dream about sitting on anything at all, a crate, a stool, the curb, or a wet Victorian cabbage. You would sit on anything. But no, you have to keep going because if you stop, the cold will come. And the cold in this time of year makes you want to sleep for the rest of your life. Your soul has gone bankrupt by the time you get to your street. You have gotten much older. Your shadow seems tired, and this is just the first day. This was something Victorians did every day. You won't want to get up again tomorrow. Sadly, you will have to. You finally get home, or at least to the building where you keep your body between factory shifts. It is a home to call it. Kind. It's hopeful to say that it is structurally sound. It's not even close to being livable. When you get back, you're in a small tenement room where privacy, comfort, and breathable air have all been taken away to save space. The smell hits you as soon as you walk in. It's a complicated mix of wet clothes, cold soot, boiled cabbage, and the faint but strong smell of too many people sharing too little space. If you put it in a bottle, it would smell like despair. 5. Your room is tiny. It's so small that if you stretch out your arms, you might accidentally join someone else's family. Your bed is a pile of straw that makes a scary noise when you lie down, as if it holds secrets. Half of it is permanently flat because generations of tired workers have fallen on it. The other half has a strange lump that you hope is straw, but think might be something from the past. You share this room with a number of other people, including siblings, parents, cousins, or even complete strangers who just happened to walk in. Some point and never came back. Space is just an idea, not a real thing. Victorian society thought it was a luxury to have 1 square foot of personal space, which is more than what you have in the factory. People can't talk because they're too tired to make language, not because of noise. The room is instead filled with soft groans, coughing fits, and the soft scratching sound of a family of rats in the corner. They also pay rent by not leaving. You try to wash up, but the communal basin has water in it that looks like it has already given up on being clean. You still splash your face with it, hoping it will wake you up. It doesn't. It just makes you wet and sad. Dinner is whatever you can afford, which is usually bread, thin soup, or something that has been boiled for so long that it has lost its original shape. You eat without thinking, staring off into space like someone who is rebooting their emotions. The room gets colder as night falls. You huddle under a thin blanket that doesn't keep you warm. A blanket that doesn't keep you warm like a wet napkin. Someone is snoring, someone is coughing in their sleep. Someone mumbles about the foreman. You wonder how long your body can handle this schedule before it just gives up. And as you lie there looking at the cracked ceiling, one thought comes to mind. What was hell supposed to look like if this is home? So here you are, lying on a lumpy straw mattress, your spine trying to work out how to give up, and your lungs full of enough factory dust to be a new mineral deposit. You made it through your first day of work in the Victorian era. If we broaden the definition of survived to include still being alive but spiritually dead, now it's time to answer the question, could you live as a factory worker in the Victorian era? Let's go over it again. A bell woke you up that sounded like it hated you. You walked through a neighborhood where every puddle was a health risk. You worked with machines that were made when safety rules were thought to be witchcraft. You breathed in air that was as good for you as chimney soot. You had lunch while trying not to get eaten by moving parts. You had to deal with a boss whose hobbies included glaring at you and hurting your feelings. You worked extra hours that you didn't agree to pay for or mentally handle. You walked home through a landscape that looked like the Industrial Revolution was losing a fight with gravity. You slept in a room that was so full of people that it could have been a jar of humans. Sardines. And you get to do it all over again tomorrow. It wasn't just that Victorian factory workers were tough. They were made from pain and need. Their bodies got used to the noise, the dirt, the hunger, the danger, and the fact that there were no minimum wage, weekends, or basic human rights. They didn't do well. They made it through. The only measure that was available was endurance. In contrast, Modern people can't stand slow Wi Fi, warm coffee, or phone batteries that drop below 20%. Imagine telling a worker in the Victorian era that people today get upset when their office chairs don't have lumbar support. They would look at you, then the chair, and then politely ask what support means. Let's be completely honest. Your lungs will be gone by noon. Machines can take away your hearing in less than an hour. The machines want your fingers more than you do. At 3:17 p.m., your mental health disappeared. Your will to go on left your body sometime between the announcement of overtime and the third fit of coughing. You wouldn't be able to live for a day as a factory worker in the Victorian era. And that's not a bad thing. It shows how incredibly hard their lives were and how hard it is for us to imagine that level of endurance now. They had no choice. You do. And you decided to watch this video from a warm room on a comfortable device while sitting in a chair that probably has lumbar support. Well done. You already have a better life than a Victorian factory worker on their best day. Before the scandal, before the Senate was scared, and before the sound of drums in the dark made Rome itself shake, the Bacchanalia were calm. They were secret meetings that took place at dusk in vineyards where the air smelled like crushed grapes and warm earth. The Greeks gave these early rites to the Italians through the cult of Dionysus, which later became the Roman Bacchus. And in the beginning, most of the people who took part were women, like wives, widows, and daughters, who wanted what the Roman world couldn't let them feel something wild inside of them. Think about it. A hill outside of town, lanterns flickering in holes cut into the stone, the leaves of the laurel tree rustle. A group of women dressed not in the heavy clothes of formal Rome, but in clothes that were loose and let them move, breathe, and get away. There is a simple wooden altar in the middle with ivy, grapes, and a clay cup full of the first pour of the year's wine. No one is screaming in excitement or going crazy yet. There was only soft singing, rhythmic steps, and a promise to honor Bacchus by going beyond the limits set by husbands, fathers, and the law. The wine was never just wine for these women. It was a key that unlocked the social ties that had been holding them back since they were born. The Bacchanalia were meant to be times of relief, rebirth, and communion with a God who said that joy was not a sin, but a divine need. And since the rites were private and kept far away from the city, they became even more holy. At first, no men were allowed. Back then, the secrecy wasn't bad. It was just for safety. But in Rome, secrecy always makes people suspicious. These twilight rituals took hold because they met a need that Rome rarely acknowledged: the desire to be free, to break free from duty and discipline and into something softer, stranger, and older than the empire's marble columns. When the wine started to flow and the songs got the women moving in deeper ways, something inside them woke up. A feeling of being one with Bacchus, not as a god of drunken chaos, as later stories said, but as a liberator, a whisperer, and a reminder that every soul still longed for the wilderness, even though they lived in Rome. And from this calm start, a movement that couldn't be stopped began. Their attraction grew as the Bacchanalia did. What started as a safe place for women grew into something much more exciting, an invitation for anyone who felt the weight of Roman expectations pushing against their ribs. Teenage boys, people who were curious about forbidden rites, enslaved people who wanted to taste equality, freed men who were turned away from patrician circles, and even a few brave nobles who wanted to have fun showed up at the gatherings. The rites were no longer quiet ceremonies at dusk. They turned into lively nights of music, wine, and dancing, where every social boundary that Rome held sacred faded away. You need to think of Rome as a pressure cooker instead of a city made of marble to get the appeal. Public life required discipline. Family life required compliance. Religion required strictness. But the Bacchanalia only wanted you to give up. People thought that bakers could talk through ecstasy, which was the shaking abandon that came over them when wine and rhythm came together. People who were there said that no one prayed to the god. People felt him. When you entered a rite, you stepped into a world where the divine was very close, and you could taste it with every sip of wine. The rituals got more intense. People brought torches into the woods. Open areas, vines coiled around tree trunks like snakes that were still alive. As the night went on, the worshippers' dancing became more and more free. Some said they felt their souls leave their bodies for a short time and then come back to a place where mortal rules didn't apply. Some people said they saw vines bursting out of the ground, animals with hooves dancing next to them, and the god's shadow moving between light and darkness. And there was a dangerous, intoxicating idea that ran through it all. Bacchanalia helped people become more than they were. People who were slaves forgot their chains. Women forgot what they were supposed to do. Men forgot what it meant to be a man in Rome. On those nights, they weren't defined by their birth, wealth, or citizenship. They were just people who worshipped a god who enjoyed the things that Rome said it was afraid of. Not everyone, of course, agreed. People who lived nearby heard drumming long after midnight. People who didn't know each other whispered about strange convulsions and cries they couldn't understand. Talk about, swirled, some not harmful and some very bad. But what really scared the traditionalists was the growing belief that the Bacchanalia was a way to set people free. Rome itself couldn't help, and the more people enjoyed that freedom, the more they came back. The rites were no longer just for show. They were a way to escape, rebel, and reveal, as well as a way into a world that Rome didn't control and would soon try to destroy. To those who didn't know what a bacchanalia was, it looked like pure madness. But craziness in these rites was a language, a planned unraveling that was meant to bring worshippers closer to Bacchus. Masks were the first step in the change. People who worshipped wore masks of satyrs, thorns, wild animals, and exaggerated human faces. Mouths that were too wide for smiles, and eyes that were frozen in joy. The mask set them free. Once they were behind painted terracotta or carved wood, they could stop being who Rome wanted them to be and become a creature of the wild, ruled not by reason, but by instinct. The music led the way down. The night was filled with restless melodies, from flutes. Drums thumped like a second heartbeat, and cymbals clashed in random bursts that were meant to wake people up. There was no orderly Roman procession that marched to this music. This sound was meant to break down the barrier between the self and the spirit. People said, "You didn't hear it, you entered it." The rhythm took over their minds and replaced them with something basic that made them want to move. And so they went, spirals, jumps, shaking movements, falling and rising again in waves, with each dancer feeding off the excitement of the next. Of course, there was a lot of wine, but it was never just a drink. It was a holy thing. Each cup represented a step closer to being one with Bacchus, a way to let the god into the cracks in your mind. The Romans believed in inspiration. Fura was a divine possession. In the Bacchanalia, that possession became the goal. People who worshipped wanted the moment when they stopped dancing and were danced, when they stopped singing and were sung to. For a few breaths, they were not alone in their bodies. Something in common, something old passed through them. Sometimes there were animals there, ivy-covered goats or little animals let loose into the chaos as living symbols of Bacchus's realm. Torches made strange shadows on trees, making the forest look like a stage where reality was thin and not very real. And as the rites reached their peak, some people said they felt claws, hooves, or vines brushing against them. These could have been hallucinations or just the mind's. Try to figure out what to do with too much sensory input. This looked like chaos to the conservative people in Rome, but to those inside the circle, it felt true. The masks made it possible to be honest without fear of consequences. The music changed the way people saw themselves. The wine opened a door. When all of these things came together, worshippers thought they had found freedom, not madness. Rome couldn't give or take away this freedom, and that freedom scared the powerful. As the Bacchanalia grew, so did the stories about them. The rites were not referred to as mere worship or emotional catharsis. In Rome's mind, they turned into a boiling pot of forbidden desires. And to be fair, the line between spiritual and physical ecstasy did get a little blurry during these ceremonies. This was not a mistake. Bacchus was a god of opposites, like creation and destruction, joy and madness, chastity and abandonment. To worship him was to walk the line between the holy and the sensual. People moved freely in the circle of worshippers, not held back by the usual Roman rules. The people who were dancing were so close that their hands brushed against each other, their breaths mixed, and their limbs intertwined as if they were all one. In that close darkness, made up of wine, music, and the idea of God's presence, normal lines seemed to disappear. Rome valued order, control, and hierarchy. The Bacchanalia got rid of them. A slave could touch a nobleman's shoulder without fear. A woman could break her silence in her marriage by singing, shouting, or hug anyone she wanted. This was not a scandal for the people who took part. It was freedom. But to people who weren't there, it was a lot more dangerous. There were stories of erratic frenzy where people got so lost in the moment that they didn't remember who they touched or kissed until dawn. Some stories said that men and women lay together in piles under the trees, not just because they wanted to, but because they owned each other and the god was moving through them. We don't know if these stories were true, made up, or politically motivated. It's hard to know what slander is. The important thing is that the Roman elite believed them. That belief turned the Bacchanalia from a private religion into a threat. A society based on discipline couldn't understand a ritual based on giving up. A society that was obsessed with hierarchy couldn't handle a rite that made everyone equal in a frenzy. And a society that was afraid of chaos could not stand a festival where worship looked like wild passion in front of a foreign god. But for the people who worshipped, the sensual parts were not wrong or sinful. They were ways for people to connect with each other, with nature, and with God. People thought Bacchus made them feel less alone. They thought he brought all of his followers together into one ecstatic body. In a world where people were strictly divided by class, gender, and duty, that feeling of togetherness seemed like a miracle. This dangerous closeness and merging would get the full attention of the Roman Senate. As the Benalia grew in size and strength, the rites don't fit neatly into clearings in the woods or the edges of vineyards anymore. Some groups literally went underground. People who worshipped met in hidden caves, empty storerooms, or rooms carved into hillsides where the sound of chanting echoed off the stone like a living thing. These secret places made the mood even stronger. The air was thick with incense, and the flickering torchlight made huge shadows. Masks stared out from the dark like spirits stuck between worlds. Secrecy was not just a part of the cult, but its blood. The secrecy didn't come from guilt. It came from wanting to protect. Rome didn't like gatherings it couldn't keep an eye on, especially ones where people of all classes met as equals. Bacchic followers took oaths of silence to protect their rights. New members promised never to tell anyone what happened in the circle once the torches were lit. If you broke that vow, you would have to leave the group or face divine punishment. Some new members said that Bacchus himself watched the meetings from the shadows, from the corners of the room, making sure loyalty by being there but not being seen. The ceremonies for initiation were very detailed. A new person came in blindfolded, and the people who were already in the cult led them in. Their first steps into the room were a sign that they were leaving the strict Roman world behind. They were given a cup of wine, which was like a promise of trust, and then they were led to touch holy things like vines, animal skins, ceremonial daggers, and wooden masks that had been blessed with oils. Each object stood for a part of Bacchus, like life, the wild, change, and let go. The blindfold came off only after this tactile journey, revealing the circle of worshippers who were waiting, masked and quiet, ready to welcome the initiate into their ecstatic fold. Rome was much more afraid of this growing network of secret places and vows than of indulgence. Unity. It was dangerous for a group to act outside of state control, no matter what their goal was. The Bacchic rites had become a safe place not just for people looking for fun, but also for people who were unhappy with Roman rule. People who were enslaved dreamed of freedom, wives who were stuck in loveless homes, and outcasts who were looking for a place to fit in. The chambers gave people a sense of freedom, equality, and the thrill of breaking free from Rome's iron grip. But the more secretive things were, the more real the rumors became. People started to talk about conspiracies, dark magic, poisonings, and even political plots. There was no proof of any of it. A lot of it was false. But what people thought was more important than what was true. And soon, Rome's view became deadly. By the early 2nd century BCE, the Bacchanalia had grown into something much bigger than the quiet cult that Rome used to allow. Most of the reports that got to the Senate were exaggerated, and some were made up. They described scenes of chaos, seduction, all-night parties, and secret gatherings with thousands of people. In a society that was obsessed with control, nothing scared it more than what it couldn't see. So, as usual, Rome did what it always did. It panicked when it came across something that went against its strict rules. The turning point came when a person who was motivated by fear or ambition, told the authorities a story that set off a wildfire. He said that the Bacchanalia were no longer just rites, but places where treason, murder, and moral decay could grow. He said that worshippers made deals behind closed doors, plotted against families, made illegal promises, and even broke the law while pretending to be in a state of divine frenzy. It's not clear if he believed what he said. It's clear that the Senate took them up with desperate enthusiasm. This wasn't really about being immoral. It was about having power. The Bacchanalia had turned into a separate society where senators had no power, women had more power than ever before, slaves and freeborn men could mix freely, and people didn't care about Rome's hierarchy. The ruling class was much more afraid of that than of rumors of drunken rites. A cult that didn't care about social norms put the very structure of Roman power at risk. And so the Senate changed the situation, turned into a full-blown moral crisis. They made the Bacchanalia sound like a disease that was spreading through the city, a plague of hysteria that put families, morals, and even the stability of the state at risk. The language became more and more dramatic. Allegations of human sacrifice, forced initiation, mass orgies, fake wills, and poisonings. Later, Libby wrote about it in a way that made it sound even worse, turning it into a story of total depravity. This was probably more propaganda than history, but propaganda works best when people are already scared. Parents started telling their kids they couldn't, going out at night. Husbands said their wives were secretly involved. Rumors spread through the markets and baths, and each story was more shocking than the last. People whispered that Bacchus himself was rising up against Rome, getting people drunk and crazy. The Senate found this fear useful. It let them tighten their grip, claim moral authority, and defend extreme measures. People no longer saw the Bacchanalia as religious rites, but as a threat to the very existence of Roman civilization. And when something is called a threat, destruction is sure to happen. In 186 BCE, fear finally turned into violence. The Senate passed the Senatus Consultum Deba Canalibus, which was one of the most severe religious crackdowns in Roman history. It said that the Bacchanalia was illegal unless the state gave its explicit permission, which almost never happened. A festival that used to be all about joy, ecstasy, and divine communion became a crime overnight. Rome, which was good at taking other people's gods, had found one it wouldn't take in. The crackdown went off with brutal efficiency. Magistrates broke into private homes, grottos, and vineyards that were said to have back altars. Torches lit up scenes of chaos, with masks ripped off walls, sacred vines ripped off ceilings, and ceremonial drums stomped on by soldiers' boots. People who had come to worship peacefully were chained up and dragged into the streets as examples of how Rome's order had been restored. Some begged, and others fought back. Others stayed eerily calm, still under Bacchus's spell, and whispered prayers as soldiers took them away. The Senate called this purge a purification, a way to get rid of moral pollution. But for the people in the cult, it was nothing less than religious persecution. Trials were quick and often meant something. A lot of people were looked into. A lot of people were killed. Some were hanged. Some were thrown off cliffs. And others were put on display in public to scare anyone who tried to revive the rites. Women, who used to be the center of Bacch worship, were judged especially harshly. The state said they were getting men to commit treason, ruining families, and causing chaos under the foundations of Rome. Rome used their supposed moral weakness as an excuse to oppress them. Not all of the followers gave in. A lot of people fought back in small, defiant ways, like hiding masks under floorboards, burying wine cups with ivy on them, and memorizing hymns so there was no physical evidence left. Some ran away to the country to worship in secret, hoping that the god would keep them safe. Others smuggled holy things to far-off places where the Romans were less likely to notice them. These pockets of survival kept the Bic spirit alive, even though Rome said it was dead. The Senate's win wasn't complete, which made them angry. They could break down altars, but not memory. They could hurt bodies, but not faith. Rome did seem to be in charge again for a while, though. The official story said that order had been restored, corruption had been cleaned up, and danger had been removed. But there was something much more complicated going on under that happy surface. A hurt people mourning the death of a god who had given them freedom. Rome had won the battle in terms of military power, but it had only just begun in terms of spirit and emotion. Bacchus waited in the shadows. Even though Rome tried hard to get rid of the Bacchanalia, the cult didn't go away. It changed. It only made its instincts for secrecy stronger. What used to be lively festivals with music and torches became whispered rituals done by small groups of believers who didn't want to give up the God who had set them free. The Senate could make it illegal. It could gather people, destroy altars, and kill leaders, but it could not kill longing, and longing was where Bacchus lived the most. Survivors kept what they could of the old rites hidden in their lives, a vine symbol carved into a ring, a piece of ivy tucked into a tunic, a quiet toast at dusk with heads bowed and a prayer whispered that used to be shouted under the moon. Women were especially important in keeping the cult alive in families. Some people taught their daughters hymns that sounded like lobbies. Others had private rites inside closed rooms with a single glass of wine and a handful of grapes instead of the big parties of the past. The music was gone and the frenzy was gone, but the devotion was still there, compressed, not broken. The cult did better outside of the city. In the countryside, where Rome's watchful eye had faded and villagers still worshipped old gods, Bacchus was welcomed back without much thought. Traveling merchants told stories of persecution that made Bacchus into a sort of an outlaw god who knew what it was like to suffer, fight back, and want freedom. This new way of looking at things only made the connection between God and follower stronger. Bacchus was no longer just the god of wine. He became a symbol of rebellion and a spiritual safe haven for anyone living under Roman rule. In Greece and southern Italy, on the other hand, where Dionysian worship had been going on before Rome even existed, the crackdown was mostly ignored. Local communities kept their rites with small changes to avoid upsetting the Romans. Government officials. As time went on, these surviving traditions mixed with what was left of the original Bacchanalia. What came out was a more controlled but lasting kind of devotion that focused on theater, processions, and symbolic ecstasy instead of frenzied possession. Even though the volume was turned down, the spirit of the cult was still there. The Senate wanted people to follow orders, not last. Rome was always hesitant to admit that Bach worship was still going strong. People need places where they can. When the strict rules of society start to fade, joy becomes a right instead of a luxury, and the divine becomes close instead of far away. As long as people needed that, Bacchus would never really go away. Rome changed over the years after the crackdown, but Bacchus stayed the same. Of course, not always in his old wild form. Time changed him, softened him, and gave him new rituals, names, and ways of talking. But the core of the cult, the desire for freedom, joy, and connection with something bigger than oneself, faded away into. In every part of Mediterranean culture, even though the Bacchanalia was illegal, their spirits were able to get through the cracks in civilization like wine getting into the grain of a wooden cup. As Rome grew, it took in a lot of different customs. And, ironically, even the suppressed Bic rites turned into festivals that were okay with society. Public events like the Liberalia and plays based on Dionysian theater kept parts of the old religion alive. Actors in masks, which were once tools for Bacchic immersion, now walked. The wooden stages of Roman theaters, which used art instead of religion to bring out the same basic feelings. The ecstatic frenzy of the old rites turned into planned dances, ritual songs, and poetic celebrations of the vine. The state had tamed Bacchus, but it couldn't get rid of him. Even as Christianity grew, Dionysian symbols could still be seen. Wine was still a holy thing. Ritual communion, drinking to feel the presence of God, was like the spiritual logic of the Bacchanalia far, more than the senators in Rome would ever say. It wasn't new to think that the divine could enter the human body through ritual eating. It had been done by Bach worshippers for hundreds of years. The church didn't like the chaos that came with Bacchus, but it got something deeper from it: the conviction that spiritual transformation could be profound, emotional, and corporeal. In medieval Europe, Bacchus lived on in art, poetry, and stories. Painters brought him back as a symbol of pleasure, rebellion, and the human, wanting to be free from limits. Renaissance scholars who were looking at old texts again saw him as a complicated god, not just the god of drunkenness, but also a source of creativity, inspiration, and freedom. Writers said he was the divine spark that takes away fear, wakes up passion, and shows truths that everyday life hides. Today, the name Bacchanalia is a short way to say wild party. But there is a deep truth behind the caricature. The people who worshipped back then wanted more than wine or madness. They wanted freedom, the right to feel deeply, to break free from the identities that were forced on them, and to touch the divine without anyone else. Rome stopped the drums, broke the altars, and sent the worshippers away. But the desire that made the Bacchanalia never went away. And Bacchus still lives in that longing. When you walked into an ancient Greek symposium, you crossed an invisible line that separated the normal world from a ritualized world of wine, wit, and carefully planned chaos. The andron, which was the room itself, was made to change. It was usually the most important room in the house, with a raised threshold to show that this was not a place to hang out. You were no longer just a citizen, friend, or guest once you crossed it. You were part of a performance, a part of a cultural engine that shaped politics, philosophy, and reputation. The room was small and symmetrical, with couches along the walls so that each man could lie down facing the center. This arrangement didn't look good. It was based on ideas. There was no one at the head of the room. There was no one who was taller than anyone else. Each man was in a relaxed, vulnerable position when they reclined, equal before the cup and the conversation. The floor was often covered in mosaics, dolphins, vines, sattas, or spiraling geometric patterns that were meant to look like the way wine and water mixed together. Even the decorations whispered hints about Dionysus, the god who would quietly watch over everything that would happen. A servant, usually a young slave, would move, gracefully moving between guests, giving them water to wash their hands and garlands to wear on their heads. These garlands, made of roses or ivy, were more than just decorations. They stood for the mind becoming softer, the heart opening up, and the tension in society easing. There was no need for stiff formality at the symposium. It was a place where people were free to let their minds wander and grow like flowers that bloom in the night air. The crater, which was like a big mixing bowl, was at the center of it all. No one drank wine that wasn't mixed. People thought it was barbaric and a sign of giving in to madness instead of philosophy. Instead, the symposia, the evening's master, chose how much wine and water to mix. His choice set the tone for the night, a weaker mix for deep conversation and a stronger mix for light-hearted banter or emotional openness. He was like a conductor leading a symphony. But instead of music, this orchestra played with words, looks, arguments, and laughter. The symposium turned into a place where reputations were made, alliances were strengthened, and new ideas were born. What started as drinking turned into philosophy, politics, and poetry, all woven together into one long, beautiful night. The crater, which was like a big mixing bowl, was the beating heart of the symposium. That was the start of everything. The Greeks thought that pure wine was dangerous because it could make people lose their minds and take away their ability to think clearly. They said that only barbarians drank it straight. Men who were civilized watered theirs down, with water doing a ritual of balance that mixed pleasure with self-control. They showed their philosophy by doing this simple act of mixing. Not enough wine made the mind stay stiff. It fell apart when there was too much of it. The perfect ratio made things clear, gave them new ideas, and made thoughts flow freely. The master of the night, the symposia, set that ratio. He would sometimes choose a mild mix of 3 parts water to 1 part wine for nights when he wanted to have a slow conversation or talk about politics. Other nights wanted more courage, maybe 2 to 1, to make the emotions more honest, the jokes sharper, and even to encourage friendly competition. The decision of the symposia set the tone for the whole night. A host who was too strict could make the room go crazy. A wise person led it to peace. After being mixed, the wine moved from the crater to the cup in a dance done by attendants. The Onachus, who was usually a young servant, poured the watered-down wine into beautiful silver or terracotta cups called yikes. The cups were made to be shallow and wide on purpose, so that each sip required a deliberate tilt of the wrist. This reminded people to drink on purpose instead of mindlessly. Many kylikes had small paintings hidden at the bottom. These paintings were often funny or sexual and could only be seen when the wine thinned, which made people laugh or comment. Even the cups and glasses were part of the fun. But moderation wasn't just about being in charge of your body. It was both moral and smart. The Greeks thought that the best conversations happened when the mind was just above sober, loose, but not lost. Ideas needed warmth, not a firestorm. In this fragile state, poets read their lines with sharp grace. Philosophers asked questions that were both logical and metaphorical. Friends told each other secrets, talked about their good qualities, or tried to solve each other's riddles. The right amount of wine opened up parts of the mind that couldn't be opened during the day. As a result, mixing became a way to control oneself. It confirmed that the symposium was not a drunken party, but a controlled enjoyment of pleasure. It encoded the Greek idea that wisdom grows in the middle of 2 extremes, like between being dry and drunk, being quiet and singing, and holding back and letting go. Greeks saw the swirling currents in the craters as the perfect metaphor for their culture. It was refined, careful, and always looking for balance. The symposium did not start with drinks. It started with positioning. It wasn't lazy to lie down on soft couches. It was a set way of standing that showed equality and openness. Guests made a loose ring around the room by lying on their left elbows and stretching their feet toward the wall. This pose made the hard lines of everyday Greek life less harsh. Being standing meant having power. Sitting was serious, but lying down was not. When you reclined, you were ready to think, feel, talk, and listen without the pressure of formality on your back. It meant that the night would not be a hierarchy, but a shared experience. After everyone was seated, they were given a garland of flowers or ivy. The wreath was a symbolic nod to Dionysus, the god of wine and inspiration. To set the mood for a night meant to awaken the senses. Guests could anoint themselves with scented oils, myrrh, cinnamon, or rose. In this setting, the mind was ready to change long before the first cup touched the lips. The conversation started with warm-up talk that was often light and fun. Men made fun of each other, told stories about little adventures, or talked about what had happened that day. But as wine slowly made its way as blood flowed, the conversation got deeper. The symposium was a place where smart people gathered, and talking was the main event. A good guest came with smart comments, stories, questions, and a willingness to talk without being rude. You could insult people, but only in a clever way. People liked wit. People looked down on vulgarity. The whole night was a juggling act between being serious and funny, and between being logical and emotional. This was the best place in Greek society for philosophical discussion. Politics, poetry, goodness, fairness, and beauty. Nothing was too high up or too fragile for the smoky air at the symposium. The room turned into a place where ideas fought and mixed like waves in a harbor. Men didn't try to show who was in charge. Instead, they tried to show how quickly they could think. A well-timed argument could make people admire you. A clumsy one made people laugh. But even mockery was part of the ritual, and it was done in a funny way instead of a mean way. The words flowed with music. Someone who lied went from hand to hand. Someone hummed a line from Homer. Someone else made up a poem right then and there. The lines between talking and performing got blurry, making the night feel more like a dance than a talk. Each voice stepped in time with the next, lying down, talking, singing, and arguing. These were not just fun things to do. They were the building blocks of Greek identity, teaching men how to think, laugh, and see the world through the eyes of others. Games were a must at every symposium, and none were more popular or more silly than kotbos. To people who didn't know better, it looked like drunken aimlessness, with men dramatically throwing wine across the room. But for people who were part of the symposium culture, kotbos was a test of grace, and accuracy. It turned the last drops of a cup into a weapon of competition and turned free time into art. This is how the game worked. Once a guest had drunk most of his wine, he swirled the last bits of it around in the bottom of his cup. He would then lie on his side and flick his wrist in a smooth arc that sent the last drops flying toward a target. A small bronze disc on top of a pole or a basin that rings like a bell when hit are common. The goal wasn't to use brute force, it was classy. The player had to have control, grace, and timing to make a good throw, especially since they were half reclined and usually halfway drunk. When the disc hit the ground, it made a loud noise, and the people watching either cheered or groaned in jealousy. But Kotobos wasn't just a game. It was a ritual of flirting and acting. Each throw was for someone, like a crush, a lover, or a hoped for conquest. The player would say the name of their chosen loved one, sometimes loudly and sometimes with a shy sense of humor. If he hit the target, it was seen as a sign that the romance would go well. In this way, the symposium became a small stage where people could safely and publicly act out their desires. A man could say he loved someone while pretending to be competing, and then let the gods of chance and wine decide what would happen to him. Men made fun of their skills and said things like, "I can do this better than you," as the room filled with laughter. Divine inspiration, or blaming Dionysus when they missed their target. People made bets. They earned the right to brag. Some guests turned Kotobos into a kind of athletic ritual by insisting that they practiced sober throws at home to get better at the symposium. Some people saw it as a chance to be funny and purposely exaggerated their failures to make people laugh. The game could ease tension, start a fight, or get people talking. What a good symposium was meant to do. Even the people who lost got something. Pay attention. In a culture where being funny and charming was just as important as being good at sports, a clever excuse or a big failure could be more memorable than a perfect throw. The game gave points for both personality and skill. Kotbos turned the symposium into a fun competition, bringing guests together through joy, mischief, and the shared silliness of trying to impress each other with a flying drop of wine. It was the other half of philosophy, the lighter half of the Greek spirit, where the mind stopped just long enough to laugh. Wine was the fuel for a symposium, but music and poetry were its heart and soul. People would always reach for a lyre after the conversation had warmed up the room and the laughter had made things more relaxed. The soft plucking of the strings marked the end of the games and arguments and the start of the performance and reflection. The music was not just background noise. It was a key part of turning normal men into thinkers, dreamers, and storytellers. A symposium without music was like wine that had been watered down. Works fine, but lacks spirit. The lyre went from person to person, with each guest adding their own touch. Some played simple tunes, while others surprised everyone with their unexpected skill, showing off talents that aren't often seen in public life. The Greeks thought that music could change the soul, just like wine could change the mind. A soft song could calm down heated arguments. A lively beat could give you energy again. A sad song could make people confess and tell deep personal truths. The music set the mood for the night, just like the symposia set the mood for the wine. Poetry was just as important. Men read passages from Homer or Hesiod to remind themselves of heroic ideals and old stories. Some people wrote clever, silly poems that were meant to make people laugh or think. Some people made up stories on the spot, testing their creativity in front of their peers. People really respected the ability to write poetry on the spot. A man who could drink, think, and write at the same time made. Respect. The Greeks thought that this ability was a gift from the Muses, a sign of divine favor that was sparked by wine and social harmony. But poetry was more than just fun. It brought the group together. Each recitation asked for a response, criticism, laughter, applause, or a poem that went against it. Like torches in a relay, ideas moved from one voice to another. Themes came up: love, courage, death, beauty, betrayal, and goodness. Guests looked at them with both seriousness and humor, moving easily between the two. This duality was in line with how the Greeks saw the world. Life was both sad and funny, noble and silly at the same time. The symposium was a perfect example of this balance. Sometimes the performances got very personal. A guest might read a poem about a lover in the room, hiding their feelings behind a metaphor. Another person might write a sad poem about a friend who has died. These moments added depth to an evening that was mostly filled with jokes and games. They reminded everyone that wine is not just for fun, but also for remembering and grieving. Poetry and music turned the symposium from a drinking party into a shared emotional space where anyone could get inspired at any time and where everyone was a part of the story that was happening that night. The symposium became its most famous role as the night went on and the wine settled into that perfect middle ground between clear and hazy. It became a place where ideas could be born. This was the time when conversations got sharper, laughter turned into thoughtful silence, and the air got heavier with questions. That didn't have easy answers. Politics and philosophy were not boring subjects here. People would wrestle with, tease, provoke, and even sing to these living things to get them to tell their secrets. Politics usually came up first in the room, either through a casual comment, a complaint about a magistrate, a rumor about a military campaign, or a sly comment about a rival city-state. What started as gossip quickly spread to the rest of the world. All of these things: Athenian democracy, Spartan discipline, Persian ambition, and Corinthian trade. Things came up in the conversation. With the help of wine, guests tore apart policies, argued about leaders, and criticized decisions. The symposium was like a political classroom with no consequences, where people could try out their ideas without worrying about what other people would think. Then philosophy came in, like a cold wind from Mount Olympus. Someone asked a question that wasn't easy, but it was one that pushed the limits of what people could understand. What is a good thing? Is being brave a matter of? Do you mean action or intention? Is there a soul? And if so, where does it live? What makes life worth living? The guests leaned in, their eyes shining with interest. The symposium gave rise to many philosophical paths, some light-hearted, some deep, and some that would echo through history. This was the world that gave us Socrates lying on a couch and using logic to challenge his friends. It was the world where Plato would later put on whole dialogues. The symposium turned thought into theater. Every man is an actor, every argument is a scene, and every insight is a plot twist. People disagreed strongly, but not often in a bad way. A smart counter-argument got a round of applause. A bad argument made people want to tease. Truth-seeking was a collective endeavor, not an individual pursuit. The best thing about symposium philosophy was that it was free. There weren't any strict schools, textbooks, or official tests yet. Thought flowed naturally, shaped by wine, friendship, and the slow burning fire of curiosity. The Andron turned into a small universe, where the city's laws became less strict and the laws of reason became more strict. Men often left the symposium changed by the time voices got softer and eyelids got heavy, not just entertained, not just relaxed, but stretched, mentally widened by the ideas shared in the light of torches and silver cups. Greece didn't get its wisdom from temples or courts. It came to life in places like this. Symposia were supposed to be meetings for rich men, but in reality, they were much more complex and interesting. Women who were known for their intelligence, wit, and artistic talent, rather than for their domestic roles, entered this world of wine, poetry, and philosophical combat. These courtesans were not at all like the wives who stayed in the private areas of the house. They were smart, charming, and often better at talking than the men who were lying next to them. Their presence completely changed the social chemistry of the symposium, adding layers of interest, inspiration, and tension to the night. A hitra could read poetry and play the lyre, challenge arguments, and give commentary that even experienced thinkers will stop and think about. She was able to move freely in male intellectual circles, unlike respectable women. She handled complicated conversations with ease and strategy. Men asked Hittite to come not just because they were beautiful, but also because they made the room more lively. They broke up the boring debates between men and brought a fun, unpredictable spark that got people thinking in new ways. A smart courtesan made a sharp comment, could bring down pride or change the course of a stalled argument better than any amount of wine. These women also had power over others. A well-known hater had ties to people in many cities, homes, and political groups. Her praise or criticism could change a man's reputation more subtly than any speech in the assembly. Some were generals' confidants, philosophers' lovers, or poets' muses whose poems lived on after whole city-states fell. Their job wasn't just to look pretty, it changed everything. As much as the wine mix or the games chosen for the night, they set the emotional and intellectual tone of the symposium. Entertainers were just as important as the courtesans. There were dancers, florists, acrobats, and other performers who made the night a show, blurring the line between ritual and theater. Their skills made things more interesting, but they also made things stand out. While philosophers fought over whether the soul was immortal, a dancer's graceful movements reminded everyone that the body also had its own kind of truth. It's important that the presence of Hete created a place where desire, intelligence, and social performance all came together. They weren't just passive guests, they were active participants who understood how the symposium worked on a deeper level, how thoughts, feelings, and egos mixed together to form a single, ever-changing current. Their laughter could make the room feel better. Their silence could make it sharper. This alchemy of presence turned the symposium into more than just a place for philosophers to hang out. It turned into a living ecosystem where gender, intelligence, and desire clashed in ways that could change alliances, spark art, or change a man's goals. Even with all the laughter, arguing, games, and flirting, the symposium was still a sacred space that Dionysus himself quietly watched over. The Greeks didn't think drinking was a waste of time. It was holy, the god who blurred the lines between happiness and madness, order and chaos, and mortal and divine gave wine as a gift. So, at the start of every symposium, there was a libation, which was a small amount of wine poured onto the floor or into a special bowl. This easy thing reminded everyone that the night wasn't just for people. Dionysus looked on. Dionysus paid attention. Dionysus made a decision. The ritual set the tone for the whole event. It told guests to drink with purpose, not for pleasure, so the wine would open their minds instead of overwhelming them. The Greeks thought that Dionysus could give people inspiration that could help them write poetry, think about philosophy, or even plan political strategy. A man who drank too much lost his divine spark and became foolish. A man who drank wisely became, in a way, a vessel for revelation. Paradoxically, moderation was how one wooed the god of ecstasy. The andron was decorated with symbols of Dionysus. There were ivy crowns on the guests, painted kylikes showing satyrs falling through forests, and mosaics of grapevines curling across the floor. These pictures weren't just random decorations. They were reminders that every guest had to be careful not to go too far. The symposium was like a controlled descent into Dionysian energy, a safe version of the wild Bacchic rites that had been turned into an intellectual ritual for the elite. Even, the order of the evening followed a set pattern: libation, mixing wine, talking, playing games, and then having deeper conversations as night fell. Each stage was like the changing states of consciousness that Dionysus controlled. People didn't call on the god with loud screams. Instead, they did it with laughter, performance, and being open. The Greeks thought that truth, whether it was philosophical, emotional, or political, was often only revealed when people took off their masks and let go of their inhibitions. The symposium was the perfect place for these kinds of revelations to happen. Sometimes the conversation directly brought up religious topics. People told, picked apart, and questioned myths. Was Dionysus really born twice? Was he punishing people by making them crazy or setting them free? Did wine make people think more clearly or show their flaws? As guests argued about the nature of divine influence, these questions mixed with the smoke of burning incense that floated through the room. In the end, the symposium was a balancing act. It accepted a god who was linked to chaos but wanted order. It made people feel ecstatic, but insisted on intelligence. It played with insanity but never gave in to it. The Greeks found a way to honor Dionysus without being eaten by him in this delicate dance. The symposium didn't end when the last caix was empty and the sun rose. It changed. What went on in those rooms had effects that went far beyond the Andron's wine stained floors. The symposium had an impact on philosophy, politics, education, art, and even how people today get together to talk about ideas over food and drink. It's His legacy has lasted for hundreds of years and has changed the idea of an intellectual community. The most obvious legacy is Greek philosophy. A lot of the conversations that shape Western thought, especially the ones that Plato kept, take place at symposia. The relaxed posture, the wine induced openness, and the mix of humor and logic made it possible for bold ideas to come up. Ideas about love, the soul, and the search for virtue didn't come from serious temples. They were born while lying down, friends with cups in hand, laughing and talking about deep questions. The notion that profound contemplation flourishes in social environments rather than solely in isolation originates from symposium culture. The symposium's role in shaping political discourse was just as important. Long before they went to the assembly, Greeks learned how to argue, persuade, and criticize in these rooms. People practiced the freedom to speak their minds in private before it happened in public. Here, men tried out there, improved their rhetorical skills, questioned the status quo, and deepened their understanding of civic issues. The symposium taught them how to listen as well as talk, which is just as important today as it was in ancient Athens. The artistic legacy is just as rich. Vases that showed scenes from symposiums became famous pieces of Greek pottery. They showed everything from elegant reclining figures to naughty satyrs and drunken raillery. Historians can learn about clothing, furniture, hairstyles, and social behavior from these pictures. Music and poetry recited at symposia shaped genres that endured long after the Greek city states declined. The picture of a philosopher with a cup, deep in thought, slightly amused, is still a well known archetype. And what about today's culture? Eating together, drinking together, and arguing together. These activities, which are very important to universities, salons, literary circles, and even political meetings, come directly from the culture of symposiums. The thought that eating together makes the best. The ancient Greeks taught us that an environment that encourages honest conversation and creative thought is important in our daily lives. People still recreate the spirit of the symposium, mixing moderation with indulgence, intellect with laughter, friendship with inquiry. This can happen at a dinner table, a cafe, or a quiet bar. The Greeks thought that wine showed who a person really was, but they also thought that truth needed friends to grow. The symposium honored both of them, and through its rituals of talking, performing, and playing with ideas, it established a basis for intellectual life that continues to influence our thoughts, interactions, and idea exchange in the present day. The wine has long dried, and the lyre strings have long been quiet, but the symposium lives on every time people share a drink and talk. Apollodorus was born in Damascus at a time when the city was more than just a crossroads. It was a place where ideas were born. Traders from the Persian East came through its gates with more than just fabrics and spices. They also brought with them knowledge, ways to irrigate land, stone cutting traditions, and math rules, improved over hundreds of years. Greek settlers brought their own words for architecture, proportions, symmetry, and the idea that beauty and geometry are the same thing. And above both of these influences was Rome, which was always growing and looking for talent wherever it could find it. These worlds didn't just affect Damascus, it mixed them together to make something new. This was the world that Apollodorus first saw. He was around stone from a young age. Damascus was a city that built with faith. Its arches were bold, its aqueducts were perfect, and its temples were a mix of local craftsmanship and ideas from other cultures. Young Apollodorus watched masons work like poets, watch the sun set. He looked at how water made its own way through man made channels and how Persian vaulting techniques let buildings rise higher with less material. For him, architecture was never just building, it was a mix of acting, math, and telling stories. He didn't have good teachers when he was younger, philosophers in formal schools, but builders and craftsmen whose hands were calloused from shaping the world around them. He learned that one wrong measurement could bring down an entire building, and that a well designed arch could lift more than any army. He studied Greek texts that were related to these lessons, essays on mechanics, geometry, and the holy proportions of temples. Damascus opened up a world of knowledge to him, and he drank it all up like dry stone drinking water. Apollodorus had the rarest gift an architect can have by the time he was a teenager, the ability to picture things in 3 dimensions. He didn't just draw buildings, he walked through them in his mind, imagining how light would fall at dawn, how people would move on festival days, and how water would sound as it rushed through hidden channels. His teachers quickly realized that they weren't teaching a student anymore. They were seeing a prodigy rise. Most architects worked for cities, but Apollodorus wanted to build empires. Rome, with its never ending need for roads, bridges, monuments, and forums, called to him like fate. He didn't know it yet, but his upbringing as a Syrian Greek and the Persian engineering legacy that lay beneath it would one day change the capital of the Roman world itself. When Apollodorus finally got to the west, Rome was more than just a city. It was a building site as big as a whole civilization. The Flavian dynasty had just finished building the Colosseum. The Forum was always being worked on, and emperors were, trying to build bigger, taller, and more complicated monuments than the ones that came before them. Rome ate marble, swallowed stone, and burned through architects faster than most cities went through grain. It was the perfect place for Apollodorus's mind to blow up. But Rome was also known for being unfriendly to outsiders. Syrian Greek architects were not supposed to be better than engineers from Rome. They were supposed to follow orders, not come up with new ideas. But Apollodorus wasn't made to be quiet and competent. He walked into the capital with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he could do. Rome had never seen designs like these before, and they used techniques from Persian and Near Eastern engineering. They also had a mathematical boldness that could take Roman architecture to new heights. Rome didn't need another person who could draw. It needed someone with a vision, and Apollodorus easily filled that role. He didn't start with big buildings. At first, his help was useful: better bridge designs, stronger military fortifications, and new ideas in how siege engines work. Trajan, a rising military leader, noticed right away. The answers Apollodorus gave were not just ideas, they worked in the field. He figured things out when other engineers were unsure. He did what others suggested. While other people accepted the limits of Roman building styles, Apollodorus went back to the engineering knowledge of Persia and the Hellenistic world to find new ways to build that Rome had never thought of. This partnership, Trajan, the soldier, and Apollodorus, the architect, made one of the most powerful alliances in Roman history. Trajan cared more about talent than family background, and Apollodorus cared more about patrons who understood ambition. They worked together to change the empire, starting not in marble forums, but on dusty frontiers where roads, bridges, and war machines were needed to stay alive. Apollodorus moved up in Trajan's circle with each success. When Trajan became emperor in 98 CE, Apollodorus was no longer just a talented architect. He was the emperor's chief engineer, his most trusted advisor, and the man Trajan thought could turn imperial ambition into stone. Apollodorus didn't just show up in Rome, a city full of talented people. He had won. Rome got more than just a ruler. When Trajan became emperor, it got a builder. Apollodorus was at the center of this imperial change. Not just an architect from Damascus anymore. Now he's the creative force behind the next great era in Rome. Trajan wanted monuments that told of power, effectiveness, and legality. Apollodorus wanted projects that pushed Roman engineering to its limits. Their goals were perfectly in line with each other. The first big project was building roads, ports, and especially bridges. Apollodorus gave Rome's armies the ability to move around, which amazed even the most experienced commanders. His bridges weren't just ways to get across. They were weapons made of wood, stone, and clever math that were used in battle. The bridge over the Danube was the most impressive of all, so bold and unapologetically huge that it broke through the natural barrier that had kept Dia safe from Rome for a long time. Apollodorus's Danu Bridge was built in record time and supported by huge stone piers. It effectively erased a river from the map. This meant war for Trajan. For Apollodorus, it meant living forever. But he did more than just fight in wars. Apollodorus made siege engines that were more accurate and had a longer range. He also redesigned defensive fortifications and improved artillery mechanisms that let Roman legions take over cities others were unable to reach. These weren't just ideas on paper. He used his knowledge of geometry and physics, which came from Persian and Hellenistic traditions that were much older than Rome itself, to make useful and brutal tools. Trajan thought that an Apollodor could make imperial ideas real in the real world. Winning wasn't enough anymore. It had to be seen. It had to be felt. Architecture turned into propaganda. Apollodorus became the hand that carved Trajan's legacy into the skyline of the capital. This combination of Trajan's military expansion and Apollodorus's architectural genius changed Rome more than any other partnership since Augustus and Agria. They worked together to build the infrastructure for expansion, the tools for conquest, and the huge spaces that would later define Roman identity. But Apollodorus wasn't happy with just being smart in real life. He had a bigger plan behind every calculation to build a monument so big, so exact, and so meaningful that it would change the way people think about the empire's language of architecture. The chance came after Trajan's biggest military victory, the defeat of Dacia. What Apollodorus made next would make even Rome gasp. If Rome was the world's capital, then Trajan's Forum was the capital of Rome. They didn't ask Apollodorus to build a plaza when they hired him to design it. He was told to change what an imperial public space could be. The result was a work of art that was impossible to make, had breathtaking coherence, and was so advanced in architectural intelligence that engineers today still think is amazing. Trajan beat DEA with military skill. Apollodorus built a monument out of stone, geometry, and a vision that brought the city into a new age. The place where the forum was held was small and uneven. A huge ridge of land kept things from getting bigger. Most architects would have changed their plans. Apollodorus just took the hill away. Tens of thousands of workers carved away millions of cubic meters of earth and rock under his direction. This was an engineering marvel, feat that rivals any ancient wonder. The real work didn't start until the land was cleared, a huge open courtyard with columns all around it, and a basilica that was bigger than any that had been built before. There are libraries, statues, arches, and Trajan's column in the middle, which looks like a marble flame. The proportions were planned. Apollodorus knew how Romans moved through space, how crowds moved, and how ceremonial processions needed to be grand without being confusing. Trajan's Forum was not a mess. It was planned out. Each structure was put in a place that made it look like another one. The libraries on either side of the column stood for the emperor's wisdom. The Basilica Aulia was the empire's administrative center. It combined the beauty of Greek architecture with the power of Roman law. The huge bronze statue of Trajan on horseback, which shone with gold, was even placed so that it was the first thing a visitor saw when they walked in, a reminder that the emperor himself was the source of power and order. And then there was the column of Trajan, its spiraling relief told the story of the Dian Wars with a level of detail that is usually only found in manuscripts. Soldiers crossing bridges, engineers building fortifications, generals talking to the troops. All of these things were done with Apollodorus's deep knowledge of war and logistics. Some historians think that he personally wrote the story, using his own experiences to shape how people in Rome remembered the war. But what really set the Forum apart was how it brought together different traditions. Persian engineering, Greek symmetry, and Roman monumentalism was combined with other styles to make a single architectural language. Apollodorus did not copy other cultures. He put them together, making each one better than the last. His forum was like a city within a city, and it was a physical argument for Rome's claim to rule the whole world. Apollodorus had the most power when he built it, but heights in Rome were always risky. If Trajan's forum was a sign of the empire's greatness, then Trajan's markets were a sign of Apollodorus's genius, like a living thing attached to the forum.